Welcome back to the second video. So here we will talk about building your form, sealing the edges, and sealing and waxing the form. These are vital parts in this whole process because obviously you don't want any leaks. But here we go, and I hope you get a bit of value. Let's go. So next step is to seal the edges of the live edge timber. So what I use is just use the epoxy. Your normal epoxy will do fine. This step here prevents your air bubbles from coming through when pouring your river. As you would know, the timber is so porous and it creates a lot of air bubbles. So this basically just clogs up all those holes. And yeah, what I will say is it's not necessary, but if you're just starting out, I would highly recommend it. Once you let it cure, give it a light sand, and then that way when you pour your resin, it gives it a good mechanical adhesion. Here I just use a silicone brush, a silicone brush, and I highly recommend them. Easy to clean, and you get multiple uses out of them. So what I'm doing here is measuring up, ready to cut my form up for my table. So obviously for my table it was too big for a standard size sheet. So what I do is cut up these extra pieces and then add it on to a full size sheet. As you can see here, with my joins I just use tape. That's aluminium tape, or you can just use normal packing tape, it works fine. So once you've got the base attached up, now go on to attaching the sides. What I like to do is do one half first, then that way it allows me just to slide the timber slabs on instead of lifting it over those and then dropping it on your fingers. You'll see what I mean just in a bit. So before you apply the mold release wax, go through and clean it out, whether it's with a vacuum or air gun. In this case I just use a Festool vacuum and that works great. Also, I highly recommend using melamine sheets or melamine sheets. So this step here is very important. If you don't do this step, it will really make a big mess. So what you use is a silicone. Get a silicone gun and then just apply the silicone in between the cracks of the joints, just around the edges and up in the corners. If this step isn't applied correctly, I can guarantee you will get a big mess, and because resin isn't cheap, it's an expensive mess. So this step here, take your time and just make sure it's done correctly. So as you can see here, I just run it along the cracks, and then once I go through those cracks, I just get my finger and just run that along the silicone, and that'll press it right down into those cracks and give you a good sealed edge. On to the mold release. So what I use there is just a beeswax furniture polish. That one there is by Glitz, and just a nice cloth. You get them cheap from your homeware store or hardware store. A little goes a long way. I highly recommend using beeswax. It's inexpensive, whereas most mold release waxes for probably quarter of that tin will cost you 3 times as more as that. So this here I found was perfect. I've had no dramas whatsoever since using it, and once again I highly recommend it. Don't be greedy with it either. I reckon more the better. There's nothing worse than having your sheet stuck to your table when you're going to release it from the mold, and it is a pain, I tell you that. So time to get the slabs in the form. If you do have help, use it, because this part can be tricky. These slabs are really heavy and awkward to use. But here you'll understand why I only put the sides on one half of the form first. Then this way I can just sort of drop them in, slide them around, and place them to where they need to be. Now to start attaching the rest of the sides of the form. Pretty straightforward this step. What I do is use the clamps, put them in position. Make sure you drill pilot holes, because if you go straight through with the screw, it'll split it, guaranteed. Obviously, being particle board, and it just makes even more of a mess. So now, once you've attached those sides up, this part can get a little bit trickier. I don't have any footage of me doing it, but so once those sides are up, what you're going to need to do now is seal the other corners of the form. What I do here is slide the slabs over, because it's all waxed up, it slides really easy. Slide them over and then just start filling in the corners. If you want to let it dry and then move them back and then go through to the other side, that helps as well. If you need to get under the slabs, what I do is put a chock under, just an old piece of wood or just a scrap piece of wood, put a chock under, seal where it needs to be sealed, and then let that dry. But that's it in this video, and I hope you learned a little bit more from this. So in the next video we will be covering measuring the resin, stirring the resin, adding your pigments, and pouring the resin. So stay tuned, and we'll see you then.